I'm Florence Nelson, and I'm here with Franklin Ahmed. Frank is one of the featured artists, actors, and authors for our 50th class reunion. Welcome, Frank.
Good to see you, Florence.
Good to see you too. Would you like to introduce yourself, maybe tell us where you're living these days and a little bit about your family?
I've been for the last 45 years. I've been in Seattle, married, two daughters. I worked 14 years in Seattle as a news reporter for the CBS radio affiliate there, and then jumped to government communications, working as a communications director for King County government for 25 years. So I retired in 2018. And that's when I started catching up, making up for lost time, publishing a biography of the novelist John Okada, and then last year writing a graphic novel, something totally unexpected. I never thought I'd be doing that, but there was a commission for it, and I was hired to write a graphic novel about the Japanese American wartime experience. And so we'll talk about other stuff as we go along.
Right. I want to hear more about John Okada and those explorations you've done on the Japanese American experience during World War II. But let's go back to Santa Cruz. You arrived there in 1969 and you entered as a politics major, but you graduated in theater arts. So tell me about that transition.
Well, that's the benefit of going to Santa Cruz, was the opportunity to explore. I had no idea government was just a placeholder. Although it's odd, I did wind up in government, a quarter century later. But it was the pass-fail system is in place at Santa Cruz at the time, at Cowell College. And that was such a luxury for me in 1969, after 4 years of quite frankly, grade mongering in high school, at Cupertino High School, struggling to get those straight A's in order to get into a good college, and be the first in my family, first generation to be in a university. So the opportunities at Cowell College were those of support and friendship and trust and being a real safe space. And so I, took World Civilization, the entry-level course for all students, politics courses, I think. And then in my sophomore year, I stumbled upon a theater directing class at Cowell College, I think, taught by a woman named Ann Reed. And that just opened up a door to something that I was kind of good at and was excited about. I should explain, Florence, that growing up in high school, I was, of course, like most of us, a complete nerd, watched a lot of television here, and loved spy shows, Man from U.N.C.L.E., Mission Impossible, and James Bond movies. And I wanted to grow up to be a TV producer or something in Hollywood. And so, I gravitated towards the theater arts classes at Santa Cruz, and it really provided a path forward for me to pursue that interest in the creative arts, which I am now circling back to pursuing again.
Great. You mentioned Ann Reed. Were there any other faculty or mentors at Cowell especially that were really influential for you?
There was a theater professor, a very Russian kind of character named John Helwig, who was an expert in Chekhov, and who I wish that someone would reconnect me with him someday, because people have lost track of John Helwig. But he was just a moody, kind of a thoughtful artist, a theater artist who inspired me. I found really inspiring, and we didn't become friends, but we became close. As student teacher, and I really respected him, and he was someone who inspired me to pursue directing as a major. Also, Audrey Stanley, the chair of the theater department at Santa Cruz, was very supportive in ways I'll describe later, I suppose.
Great. Well, I don't remember much about John Helwig. I remember his name, but we put his name out in the universe now. So
yes, I hope something will come up with that. Yeah.
Right. I'll use the current term as a person of color, a Japanese American at Cowell College. You were in a minority. Where did you find your community beyond the theater activities on campus?
When you ask that question, Florence, it really provokes a lot of thought that, of course, person of color was not a term back in the 70s. Back then, it was third world. I think was the best we could do. The third world students, and there were very few Asian students, very few Latino students, even, and I can recall no African American students at Cowell College. I'm sure there were, if I look in the yearbook, but I just don't recall anybody that I was close to. What I found was my community was the people in my dorm in Morrison House and Beard House. I became a resident assistant. And so my other community, Florence, was, I think, the student government at Cowell College. And you forced me to think about this. There was a board of selectmen who were kind of the student, leaders. There were no elections, I don't think. I didn't run for any office, but somehow I have a memory of going to these meetings of the board of selectmen in the conference room up in the administration area, and with people like Gideon Rappaport and Jane Hansen and Jasper Rose, the provost, was in these meetings, and I'm sure we planned big things, but I can't remember what they were. But the Cowell College was my community as a whole. I mean, I didn't have at that time any kind of identity as a person of color. That came later.
So you graduated. What happened next?
I was graduated as a theater major, and through Audrey Stanley, I had auditioned for this theater program of all 9 UC campuses that was going to be a production of the 15th century morality play Everyman, with student actors from every campus in the UC system, and was supposed to do that. My mother sent me this clipping from a Japanese American newspaper about an Asian American theater workshop that was being founded at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, accompanied with a scholarship to the Summer Training Congress. And ACT, of course, was something I never dreamed I could aspire to. So the combination I applied for and was admitted to that program, and I had this dilemma of having this commitment to the UC program. And I went to Audrey Stanley and asked her, and she says, "Well, Frank, you made a commitment, and there'll be certain repercussions from that, but you should follow your heart and do what's right for you." And she actually encouraged me to pursue it, the Asian American Theater Workshop, which was a life-changing experience, because that was where I got to meet Frank Chin, the playwright, Lawson Yonada, the poet, Sean Wong, the novelist, Jeff Chan, who recently passed away, novelist, who were the founders of the Asian American literary sensibility at that time in San Francisco. So went to San Francisco, fell in with this gang, the Combined Asian American Resources Project, helped start this Asian American Theater Workshop, and that kind of launched me into this, discovering myself as a Japanese American, Asian American, and not just a theater student or a student of the world, and that was kind of where I've pursued that ever since, for the last 45 years.
Right. So you did. That was my next question. Pursued this focus, this passion, learning and reporting on the war resistance movement during World War II and the Japanese internment camps. And I think you've hinted at how you became interested in this topic. Was this something that your family talked about at all with you when you were growing up?
Well, no. My father. I'm speaking to you from my family home in Santa Clara, where I'm looking after my mother right now, and I'm looking at the kitchen area where my father would sit and tell me about this place called Hart Mountain that was a camp. And this is a very typical story, Florence. The way he described it, it sounded like a summer camp he went to, and not an American concentration camp. At Santa Cruz, there was no classes on this subject in the history classes or world civilization, and there were no ethnic studies courses. That was still an emergent movement in San Francisco at the time. there's a fellow named Patrick Cavendish at Stevenson who had founded a Asian American Studies course, the first Asian American Studies course at UCSC, and I got these flyers inviting me to come, and I didn't respond because I didn't feel like the third world movement was me. I didn't have that connection. But going to San Francisco and then falling in with the theater workshop changed my life. Now, so my father did not talk about Hart Mountain, where he was incarcerated. But every Japanese American of their generation had these books that they would order. And this was the book my father had, this very book, in fact, on the shelf, his Nisei, The Quiet Americans. And I opened this up and I read it, and I said, oh my God, there was this, they called it an evacuation at the time, a mass removal and eviction of 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, including my father. And the fact that it was real made me want to, learn more about it. But I tell you, Florence, books like this made me so angry at the same time because they promoted the idea, if you read it, that our community's response to this massive violation of constitutional and civil rights in World War II, that our response to it was could be codified in one of two Japanese terms: shikata ganai, Japanese for "it can't be helped," which is passive resignation in the face of injustice, or "go for broke." You heard that term, "go for broke." Hawaiian pidgin for go all out, give 110%. Patriotic self-sacrifice in order to prove one's loyalty to America. And I tell you, neither of those two extremes made any sense to me as a, UCSC student activist, growing up in the 60s with the civil rights movement happening all around us. It was that kind of questioning I had. Mom, Dad, why didn't you resist? They would, at the time, parents of that generation would pat my generation on the head and say, "Oh well, why didn't resist? We cooperated, we complied, we left our homes and surrendered everything to go into these camps. But times were different then. You can't judge us with Berkeley civil rights activism of the '60s." So I did oral histories with theater workshop. We did theater productions. I read books. I met a lot of writers through my friends in San Francisco, and that continued on even while I had to work for a living for 40 years. So I got a job as a radio journalist in San Francisco. In Seattle, I should say, a radio journalist in Seattle, to learn how to write, basically. And my friend had said, well, they like to bring the people up from the inside, go get an entry-level job, and I was attracted to it because in radio, you're dependent on the written word to speak to an audience. You don't have pictures to rely on. And so I was trained in how to write for the ear and not for the eye in 30-second, how to use words to grab an audience's attention instantly. And then my theater training, the voice production classes we'd taken at NECT helped me to, learn how to speak more resonantly on the radio. And so that helped me get a job on the air as a reporter. So that was the writing part. The other part is going to the dark side, as they say in journalism, and jumping from covering the King County government to being part of it as a communications director for Gary Locke, the King County executive, first Chinese American governor of Washington State, eventually. And I stayed there for 25 years, doing it for various county executives. But that I bring that up, Florence, only to say to students that, even though that's my day job, I was still learning things about how things worked, how governments worked, and how decisions are made at the very highest levels. I was part of the senior management team in King County government, and we handled all kinds of crises. Thank God I'm not there now for this COVID pandemic, public health crisis. But I learned a lot, and now that I've retired, I'm able to bring that to my writing on the American government in World War II, and how the government, bureaucracy, um, uh, uh, work this eviction and incarceration of 100 to 120,000 people in World War II, and that helped me to develop characters for the graphic novel that were pushing back against these government actions. So no, what I'm trying to say, Florence, is that at Santa Cruz and after, I didn't really have anything to write about. I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't have anything to write about. But I was going out and getting that life experience in these different jobs that I'm now finding I'm able to bring back into books and graphic novels, and next year a stage play. So it's all kind of coming together in my 70s.
It takes a while, but
it takes a while. Yeah,
you gotta have that experience. And like you, I've moved. My career has taken different paths, sort of on the same theme. But when you have the chance to reflect about 50 or 60 years of experience, you begin to see how everything sort of fits together and led you to where you are today and the vision you have today. So we just have a few more minutes. And one question that we're asking everyone we're interviewing, do you recall the Cowell motto, the pursuit of truth in the company of friends? And I'm wondering whether that has played a role for you in your life and career.
I've thought about that, Florence, and it was a lofty goal. And I associated it more with people, students like Gideon Rappaport, who was very, smart, very intellectual, and very idealistic, even then. And people like Jasper and Mary Holmes, who, kind of lauded this idea of the city on the hill. I think that this term that inspired me more was a bumper sticker that we would see in the 60s during the Cambodian strike, the shutdown of 1970, which is question authority, and that was something that I learned at Cowell, from just being there, was a bit of rebelliousness, perhaps, but an ability to look behind the scenes and try and question motives and question authority. I wasn't a part of the authority for 25 years in government, but even then, I was not. I was still trying to question what we were doing, to be sure that we were doing the right thing. Always trying to do the right thing.
Right. So you've had, as you described, a pretty varied career, acting, working in radio, where you mentioned you went to radio to learn how to write, and it sounds like you did. Being immersed in a cause and writing now in several genres. You're going to be working on a play for theater soon.
This very strange thing was just I've gotten a commission. I've been commissioned to adapt a well-known Asian American novel for a major repertory regional theater in Seattle, and so that's going to be the challenge.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, have any of the things that you've done in your career been more rewarding or more challenging?
I would say creating the Asian American Theater Workshop in San Francisco was the most rewarding, because it was an attempt to create something new. When I described it to Audrey Stanley, she said, "Well, yes, you can create something new, but you must know where theater comes from. So, don't forget your classical training." And I said, yes, Professor Stanley. Thank you very much for the classical training in theater. But I was able to apply that, I'll take that education and apply it to the work we're trying to do to create new plays in San Francisco through the theater workshop. That was a big challenge. It was, the theater lasted maybe 10, 15, 20 years after I left. And so the chance to circle back to that and work on it again is the second big challenge I'm facing right now.
Right. So I guess we need to wrap it up. but we really appreciate your giving your time to this conversation. And it's going to be one of several interviews that are going to be on our Cowell Class of 72 reunion website on the larger UCSC and Cowell website. And we're going to post the interview along with a couple of links from some of your work so people can see what you're talking about. Just in closing, you did say a little bit about some thoughts you had for younger writers. Do you have a few more thoughts about what your career might teach some people setting out before we conclude?
Pursue your interests. You don't get locked into what your parents tell you first, which no one ever does follow that, but you never know what doors are going to open that will show take you down a new path. And I've stumbled through all these different careers and projects, not knowing what I was doing, but just doing it because it felt right at the time. So I would just say follow your instincts, and you can't just plan a career. Oftentimes, you have to follow the opportunities that present themselves. So just take them when they come along.
I think that's great advice and a great way to end this. So thank you again.
Thank you, Florence.